Getting there is half the fun, but sometimes getting back is not so easy. Find out about my Desperation in Cairo, coming up on Architecture CodeX.
Architecture CodeX. If you want to see more, subscribe.
Abu Simbel is a place with two amazing Egyptian temples, carved from solid rock almost 3,300 years ago. I wanted to see it. I wanted to sketch it. It was 1986 and I was too young for a bucket list, but this new architect had just broken up with a girlfriend and was looking for adventure. This was 10 months after the Achille Lauro had been hijacked and tourism in Egypt was down. I did not meet another American during my trip except at the American Consulate, and you'll see why later. I bought a round-trip ticket to Tel Aviv and after a very short time in Israel, took a bus across the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Desert to Cairo, expecting I would return for further adventure in Israel. Nearly all the Egyptians I met were very friendly and very happy to see an American tourist and said to me, "Welcome to Egypt," when that's not what they call their country, they call it Mizra. But there were some Egyptians who wanted to sell me things, and that's understandable too. And these men would stand in the street with some very expensive Rolex watches and ask me, the American, with a $15 Timex digital, what time is it? There'd be a series of polite sentences, but eventually it would end up with me saying, "No thank you, I don't want to go to your brother's shop to see antiquities," and "No thank you, I don't need a tour guide to tour the ancient sites," and "No thank you, I don't want to exchange American dollars." In Cairo, I saw the pyramids and the Sphinx. I made my way to Luxor to see the Temple of Karnak, Architecture Codex video number 18, and then took a train to Aswan. From there, it was an all-day bus trip to see Abu Simbel. By the way, I was wearing my dad's old fedora on hiking trips long before there was an Indiana Jones, and I was not going to stop just because of the 1981 movie. The two temples at Abu Simbel are dedicated to Ramses II and his chief wife, Queen Nefertari. It took about 20 years to carve the temples from the mountain-sized rocks. The Ramses Temple is about 100 feet high, and in the usual mode of Egyptian symmetry and redundancy, it has 4 colossal statues of him sitting that are about 65 feet tall each, and balancing on each side of the entrance to the temple chamber. He is wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Smaller carvings of his wives are between his knees. It's good to be the king. The inner chamber has its main sanctuaries on axis with the entrance, a series of smaller and smaller rooms to the dark sanctuary. There are chambers perpendicular to this axis, but the main focus is on the god effigies in the dark sanctuary. Currently, on October and February 22nd, the rays of the sun are aligned with the axis and the sunlight will illuminate the figures in the dark sanctuary. This phenomenon supports the legend that says those are the dates that Ramses was born and the date he took the throne. There is a second temple dedicated to his main wife. Here, the 2 statues of Nefertari in the center of each group of 3 statues are equal in height to the 2 statues of Ramses on the outside of each group of 3. Each group of 3 is not identical, but are balanced on each side of the temple entrance. The queen being the same height as the king is apparently a first in Egyptian architecture. Inside, both the pharaoh and his queen are depicted with the gods in various tableaus. Again, an Egyptian first for the queen. The temples sat deep in Egypt near the Upper Nile for 3,000 years, and then they moved them. The Aswan Dam was being built between 1960 and 1970 and created Lake Nasser, a reliable water supply for Egypt, but this prevented the Nile from flooding annually the way it had done for many thousands of years. As the lake filled, the temple of Abu Simbel would become submerged, and there were many schemes that were developed on how to move the monolith temples above the future water line, but time was running out. So they sliced it like a loaf of bread, making a bunch of stone croutons, which they assembled above the waterline. It is believed that in assembling the temple, they moved the dates of the alignment with the sun within the deep sanctuary. This leg of my pilgrimage completed, I headed back to Cairo so I could return to Israel. I bought a second-class train ticket, which I did not know meant I would be in an open coach overnight. To be on the safe side, I actually packed together all my ID, my credit cards, my traveler's checks, and put them in my front hip pocket so that anyone getting it would have to cut off my leg. Meanwhile, if my bag and stuff were above on the rack and they grabbed it, they would get my clothes and my camera, but I would have my important papers and possessions, including my sketchbook, by my side. When we arrived in Cairo, there was a frantic exodus to leave the train while other people were trying to get on, and I held tightly to my shoulder bags, and I was trying to find a clear spot to get my things in order. But I ended up on the wrong side of the tracks. While there, a friendly Egyptian pointed out that there was dog crap on my left pant leg, and while I was wondering how it got there and finding tissues after I put my bag down so I could wipe it off, he began to help me clear it off, slapping at my leg while I was saying, "No, thank you, that's not necessary." Anyway, the dog feces now gone, I began to walk away, and I turned to say thank you to him, and he sort of smiled and then turned away. And then I took 2 steps in the opposite direction, and I realized something felt funny. There was something missing from my front pant leg. He had pickpocketed my wallet with my credit cards, with my passport, and with all my traveler's checks. I turned around again, and he was gone. I had about 5 Egyptian pounds in my other pocket. I knew there was an American Express office at the Cairo Hilton, across the Tahrir Square from the Cleopatra Hotel, where I stayed when I first got to Cairo. It was Thursday evening, about 5 p.m., and I needed to get to the American Express office quickly. I got a cab and negotiated my price to be within my means. The American Express office was about to close, but they were very helpful, only they could do nothing until I got a police report from the tourist police. They paid for a taxi to take me there. And there I sat on the steps of the tourist police office in Cairo, waiting for it to open at 10 p.m. I had no money, no traveler's checks, no credit cards, and no passport, and no idea what I was going to do next. Where would I sleep? How would I eat? And how would I get home? I felt stupid. Here I was, an experienced New Yorker, taken in by a scam pickpocket. When the sergeant came, he opened up the office, and I told him what had happened. He shook his head. They produced a report in Arabic, and I signed it, hoping I was not admitting to something that would send me to a prison in Turkey. I did have a voucher for one more night at the Cleopatra Hotel. The hotel was kind of run down, and it looked like no one had done any improvements to it since the Europeans left in the 1950s. I would check in and just not check out. They served breakfast there, so that was some food. The hotel desk wanted to see a credit card, but I told them that the voucher was good enough. Aggressive begging became an important technique of mine. The next morning, on Friday, August 15th, I went to the American Express office and I showed them the police report. And they were very helpful. They canceled my credit card and then restored the traveler's checks. But then they asked for ID. Well, I had no ID. No ID, no traveler's checks, no credit card. I would have to go to the American Consulate office, but that was closed until Tuesday because of a Muslim holy festival. So I did a little more aggressive begging, and I talked them out of $50 worth of traveler's checks just so I could survive until Tuesday. I went to the consulate office that Friday to speak with someone who asked me a few questions and then wrote a letter saying that he believed I was an American. Come back on Tuesday. The letter was not good enough for American Express. I had to find another place to cash the checks, but without ID, and banks were out of the question. So I went to a souvenir store. There I explained to the shopkeep that I had traveler's checks, but no ID. And then I naively said with my eyes wide open, "Would you like to exchange American dollars?" He was a bit cautious. He showed me some checks on the wall that he had honored and was not paid for. So you see, he thought I was trying to rip him off. So we bartered a bit over a cup of tea. I agreed to buy 2 bottles of essence of flour, and he would give me the rest of the change in Egyptian cash. Deal. With 70 Egyptian pounds, I set aside money for passport photos and some food. Eating was easy since I got accustomed to street food. For 40 piastre, I could get a hot sausage sandwich with green peppers and pickles and a hot paste that seared my mouth. It hit my colon like a depth charge, so I had to stay close to the hotel. There was also a lamb, tomato, and onion sandwich with other unidentified things on it. I could splurge and spend a whole Egyptian pound, 60 cents, for a meal in a falafel restaurant if I felt like it. I tried the squab, which I figured was just one of those pigeons from Tahrir Square, but the price was right. Early on Tuesday morning, I went to the American Consulate office and I filled out the form, and they prepared for me a new passport. But then they wanted $40, and I explained I couldn't get the money until I get the passport. So I took the passport and I gave them my sketchbook, explaining that in one sense I was happy that whoever took my money and my passport didn't take the sketchbook, because I could replace the other things. This I could not replace. So they held on to it. I went to the American Express office, got my money, came back to pay for my passport, and got my sketchbook back. By the way, they liked my sketches. So while I had my passport, I next had to get an exit visa. Fortunately, the Egyptian office for that was in the Mogamma office building right off of Tahrir Square near my hotel. To get my exit visa, I met a series of clerks, paid a series of fees for a series of forms, and kept going back and forth. And then occasionally one would say, come back in an hour, and I would come back in an hour and there would be a different clerk who required a different fee. This was a common way to make sure you didn't have to do any work by telling someone to come back in an hour. By the 8th office, someone said to me, okay, you're all set, come back in 3 days. And I said, I have a plane ticket for 2 days. I can't come back in 3 days. I lied. It was the only way I was going to get any motivation. So he said, go see the colonel. And I went into the next room and I saw the colonel. And he said, come back tomorrow at 10 a.m. I left immediately to buy an airline ticket with that American Express card. Wednesday, I'm back at Mogamma, and there were more officials, fees, and stamps on my application. In the last office, the commander signed my application and clapped his hands twice, and a soldier all in white came in and took the application and then disappeared for 20 minutes. Eventually he returned, the commander signed the application one more time, they stamped my passport with my exit visa, and I was told everything was fine, I could go. The next day I was on that plane home. So I had gotten what I wanted, a chance to see and sketch Abu Simbel and many other great Egyptian buildings, and an adventure. I'm Michael Molinelli, and this is Architecture Codex.